Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Supercoach Mates. While we are at preliminary final week, after two really entertaining and perhaps controversial semi-finals. So we're just going to basically do what we did last week. So, as per normal, I am joined by Thomas. How was your weekend watching the games?
Yeah, good. Unlike what we just spoke off air about 5 minutes ago, I think your use of the word controversial is a little bit of an understatement. I think someone wasn't too happy with some umpiring stuff, but we'll get on to that a bit later. No, it was good. The first final was obviously quite tense in itself, and yeah, as much as I wanted the Hawks to sneak over the line, they unfortunately didn't quite get the chockies done. And then the Brizzy game. I think I was half asleep on the couch when GWS were all but through it late in the third quarter, and they came back storm and hope the Lions, and it was definitely a win for the ages and a bit of an underdog story. They've always had a bit of a soft spot for the Lions as well, so definitely glad they got through into a prelim, which presents itself to be a very juicy clash against the Cats. But yeah. I guess we'll elaborate a little bit further onto Nathan's little bit of a boycott onto his watching of the finals. I don't think he watched too much of the footy. But let's move on to our first segment. Nay stats that matter. He's been nailing them the last fortnight with the final series. Do you reckon he can make it 3 from 3 this week?
Yeah, so we'll just quickly run over the stats. So once again, both the winners had more inside 50s than their opponents, and they scored more from turnover, which for those of you who are not aware of them, 11 of the last 11 premiers on grand final day have won the inside 50 battle and the scores from turnover battle. So I guess this is just sort of supporting that evidence that's been presented on grand final day that if you can, own territory inside 50, but also being able to score once you turn the ball over, is so vital in finals football. And so I'm currently working through a little bit of a project here, but I just want to briefly talk about chaos v control. So, some of you may have heard these mentioned throughout and be wondering what exactly does this mean. So basically, the way champion data define a game as being either a control game or a chaos game is simply if there's more ground balls than there are marks, then they consider that to be a chaos game. And if there's more marks than ground balls, they consider that to be a control game. So being able to play the chaos game, which is the high turnover game, high ground ball game, is so vital. And it gets even more vital now, because I believe in the last 15 years of preliminary finals and grand finals, only 7 of these games have been a control game where there's been more marks than ground balls. And if we go to grand final day, only 3 of the last 15 grand finals have been a control game. So if you cannot play in a chaos game and your game style does not stack up with regards to being able to score, especially from turnover, you basically cannot play in big matches at the pointy end of September. So this is why people are so critical of sides like Fremantle and Essendon and Geelong up until 2022, because they played this control game where they chipped the ball around and it got them through a home and away series. But as soon as they got into finals, they got found out by these teams who play the chaos, the high turnover game. And that is why Fremantle, Essendon are where they are now, because once they don't have control of games, they cannot seem to be able to stop opposition momentum. And I've just been having a quick look through as well, and the overwhelming majority of the time, if it is a chaos game, the side who has won the scores from turnover has won the game. So I guess that just supports the theory even more that if you cannot score from turnover and you cannot play in a chaos game, then you are no chance of having success come the pointy end of September.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. I think you nailed it on the head. Head. I can't even speak English today. Head there today. Head. Oh, let me rephrase that. You've nailed it on the head there with regards to the whole chaos versus control. You just have to look at Geelong's style of play. Pre 2022 versus now, they've almost altered a little bit. And you look at the likes of Tommy Stewart going into the midfield, causing a bit of chaos ball through his kind of pressure Atkins kamikaze role in there as well. Just really small tweaks in their game style to really kind of capitalize on situations.
I will just point out as well that in the last 3 years, so 2021, 22, and 23, only one of those prelim finals has been a control game, according to my data set I've got here. Only one, and that was a game that a side won by 12 goals. So I don't know if you can really count that because it was a 12-goal margin. But all the other preliminary finals that I've got on here have been chaotic, high turnover, high ground ball games. So if you cannot engage in this, then you are no chance.
Yeah, no, I think you're right there in the fact that, granted, there's times in finals where control is important, but yeah, chaos ball is where it's at, and I think Collingwood thrived on that last year, and that's predominantly reason why they won the grand final.
But, that's why I always maintain that if Collingwood made the finals this year, I think they would have done some damage. Just purely because of that fact that the game turns into more of a chaos game. And we saw last year how well Collingwood actually did when the games were like that. So, that's just my little reminiscent thing.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. But yeah, moving on to the week 2 of finals, I know, Nath, you had, and you can talk a little bit more about this in your rant coming up shortly with regards to the kind of top 4 takeaways of what I saw. And obviously, Nathan, you can react to what kind of my comments, and you would have seen in bits and pieces of this. But we'll talk about, I guess, Ken Hinkley and Jack Ginnivan's altercation in a minute in Nathan's rant. I can see that's coming shortly, and I'll have my 2 cents worth in that. But first off the bat, this was kind of a takeaway with the Hawks game in particular. I know in the Hawks game late, they swung Sicily forward, which kind of worked. But as a result of that, they kind of got caught out a fair bit, defensively speaking. As soon as they lost Sicily, they lost a lot of structure down behind the ball, and that caused a few problems for the Hawks. And then the forwards in particular capitalised big time. Do you think, and obviously you can attest this in the fact that Collingwood played my check, and that was about in the 2023 grand final. Do you reckon a final side needs an A-grade key forward to win a premiership at the end of the day? Yes or no?
No.
Why is that?
No, I'll be very blunt and say that having a key forward, again, much like the control game, a key forward might stand out in a home and away season, but as soon as it gets to finals, it becomes more of a grand ball game, it becomes more of a chaos game. You generally don't have as much time on the ball, and generally the type of players that thrive in finals are the smaller forwards, because it is more of a grand ball game. So generally, these are the first players who do get nullified in a chaos game. Are these key forwards? And we just have to look back to last year's Collingwood side. Had basically one key forward in my check and had a fleet of smalls around them. Richmond in 2017 had Jack Riewoldt and a fleet of smalls around him. There are obviously exceptions to that, and that's one thing that stats will point out is that there are exceptions to that. I know Geelong had Hawkins and Cameron in 2022, but I think Jeremy Cameron is a different type of key forward because he can actually play smaller. He can wing ground ball, but I'm talking more your traditional sort of, like a Tom Hawkins or, one of those types of key forwards. They do get nullified, I guess, easier in finals because there's not as much of that clean ball. It's sort of a bit more of a dirty ball.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, outside of Hogan, and perhaps Danaher, there hasn't really been a key forward who's fired this final series. I can probably tell you now that having a look at these upcoming preliminary finals, it's probably going to be what the small forwards do, especially that Sydney Port Adelaide game. It's going to be what the small forwards do, not what Logan McDonald or Charlie Dixon or Joel Amati. I'm not looking at those guys. I'm looking at Papley, Rioli, Haywood, Darcy Byrne-Jones, those types of guys will determine that game. And as for Brisbane and Geelong, I think Geelong small forwards, again, will determine that game. I still expect Cameron to score, but as I said, Cameron is a bit different because he can win ground ball. And Joe Danaher, look, I think any goal you get from a key forward is bonus in a final. I know Joe Danaher's record in finals is actually not too bad for a key forward. But generally, I wouldn't be looking towards him to be a match winner. I think that was a bit of a one-off on Saturday night. But yeah, that's just sort of my observations. Is that no, you don't need a big key forward to win a premiership, but you probably find they'll be helpful in a home and away series.
Yeah, I mean, I completely understand where you're coming from. I just think personally, having watched the entirety of that game, I think it was maybe Marbiol Chol was a bit of a liability up forward. And I think if you chuck in a Mitch Lewis in there, all of a sudden that dynamic completely shifts. I completely understand where you're coming from with regards to the whole mosquito fleet and the small forwards having a lot more significance come September due to the pressure. But I think I probably wouldn't say as far as just agree with you in the fact that it won't win you a premiership, but it will go a long way into solidifying.
Well, it'll help, but it'll help, but it won't be the reason why you win one. It'd be an outlier. That's sort of more where I'm getting at. Is it? Yes, you need them. You need them, but they won't. When it comes to it, they sort of become more of a structural player rather than your go-to player for kicking goals. That's sort of more where I was getting at.
Yeah, no, I do agree. And I think in this case here, Chol was a bit of a problem. He just wasn't getting anywhere and just not giving the small forwards first use of the pill. But moving on down to the next kind of discussion takeaway point, you can obviously attest to this with regards to what you've seen as well from the Giants throughout the season. I want to ask you, Nath, why do you think the Giants, and they've done this before, even when they played St Kilda, they almost blew it after having a considerable margin. They blew it against the Lions, and they're probably kicking themselves big time considering, if they played the Cats, they probably would have had a fair chance to make it all the way just with how well they stack up against them. Why do you think the Giants have these fade-outs in games? So obviously, if you were not aware of how the finals match went out, they were basically around 44 points ahead, closing on three-quarter time and just got blew out the park in the last quarter. Why do you think, if you had to put your thumb or put your finger on one aspect, that the Giants just crumbled time and time again in situations where they really should be dominating teams to finish off strongly?
Yeah, well, there are some things. So they are number one pressure side in the AFL. Now that takes a lot out of you playing that sort of game style, a high pressure game. Outside of that, they don't really have a lot statistically that was going well for them. So basically, that's what they were relying on was their pressure to keep them in games and perhaps win them games. But you look at the way that they play and the way that Collingwood play last year, it was quite similar. The difference was though, was that the Collingwood had this ability to sort of switch on and off in game. So they never got too far ahead, but they never got too far behind either. So it wasn't as taxing for that. You could say it's slightly more riskier playing that way, but it worked for Collingwood. Whereas the Giants are basically go, go, go for 3 quarters. They get themselves in front, but as soon as they shift away from that way that they play and go to more of the control game, it sort of doesn't suit the way that they want to play. And I guess in the case of Sydney, and Brisbane as well, they basically just play to win, and the Giants just weren't able to sustain that pressure, and the way that they play for the full 4 quarters. So I guess that's where the subtle difference was with Collingwood, where if you look last year, it was quite similar, but they'd start off well, Collingwood. They'd sort of falter and perhaps just sort of level the score in the middle block.
Yeah.
And then the last quarter, if they were behind, well, it was go. And if they were ahead, they sort of played like they did in the middle 2 quarters. And then if they got later on in the game, they'd sort of slowly shut it down. Whereas the Giants don't seem to be able to do that, which is why they have crumbled in their 2 finals. It's astonishing that they've led for 250 minutes of the 2 finals and are not there on preliminary final week. But yeah, they're sort of my takeaways on that. They just lost territory when it mattered most. And their turnover game got shut down when it mattered most. And when you don't have a good defensive profile to start with, as soon as you lose any grip on the game, the floodgates can just open. And unfortunately, that's what we saw with the Giants, in that because their defensive profile wasn't that good. As soon as they lost momentum in the game, the floodgates just opened and it let sides back in. And then, they can't seem to be able to arrest the momentum when it's going against them. So that's sort of my takeaways from that.
Yeah, no, I do agree with you there. I think they do work on short bursts of kind of form within games, and they just crumble at times. It's almost like they don't know what to do with the ball in positions where they just really should dominate sides, and they freeze up. And as you said, a lot of it is built around that chaos ball and that sort of stuff, and they don't really have another level to go to when they are well ahead. There's no real, all right, let's pull back, let's calm it down and run out the clock. They're always go, go, go. They always play down the corridor. They don't really know any other way. So, yeah, it'd be definitely frustrating if you're a Giants fan that they've made that one, let that one slip. But moving on to the second last point here. This was an interesting one. Come the Giants game, Peatling was actually, I did put it up on social media about basically it's probably going to be attention on Zorko and Neil, and it turned out that Peatling was the one, played a very good game himself, ended up running forward of the contest and nullifying Zorko basically on the way back out, so he wouldn't be able to slingshot and be as aggressive coming out the other way, and just really struggled. It wasn't until Connor McKenna came on as a sub that the line started to get some rebound footy in the hands of McKenna and slingshot the other way. Put it simply, Nathan, do you think that if you take out Zorko come Saturday twilight, you take out the Lions and the Cats win comfortably? Or do you think there are other avenues that the Lions have kind of uncovered again or discovered throughout their almost 10-goal last quarter performance to beat the Giants? Or do you reckon if they shut down Zorko, it's game over against the Cats?
No, I think Chris Scott will have a plan for Zorko, and the way that Chris Scott sets Geelong up, sort of nullifies what Brisbane try and do so effectively. So Chris Scott will not let Zorko and probably Neil just roam around and get their own football. So there will be a plan for them. I would be surprised if McKenna started as a sub again, just because I think Brisbane will have a plan for. I think Geelong will have a plan for nullifying Zorko and Neil. And as we touched on again, I don't think the way that Geelong are defending at the minute, I don't think they're going to let Brisbane back in like what the Giants did on Saturday night. So, I think Geelong will have already identified this. I'd be staggered if they let Zorko just roam around free off the back line. And I did sort of catch some of the stats after the game, and I did notice Zorko was probably down a bit on his normal output until the last quarter. You could probably, I guess, justifiably say that if you manage to take away Zorko, and there's no one else off the half-back line who's giving them that run, you can probably nullify Brisbane to some extent. So to lead and answer your question, yes, I think if you take Zorko out and there's no one else there on that half-back line, then I don't think Brisbane can do any damage.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. I think the Giants got it right for 3 out of the 4 quarters, but come the last quarter, they just really lost what they had in the first 3 quarters and just, stumbled across the blocks when it came to nullifying those two. And as soon as Neil got off the chain, Zorko got off the chain, they really just couldn't shut them down. But moving on to the last point before we go on to Nathan's Nags, Willie Rioli I haven't watched that many Port games, granted, this season, but in my opinion, had pretty much the best game of his season against the Hawks. Was literally unstoppable. Like, they put Hardwick on him, still was unstoppable. The man was a man possessed. Everything went through him. There was no Charlie Dixon. They had to find other avenues to goal. Georgiades and Marshall were generally well held overall, and Willie Rioli was the one that got off the chain. And this probably ties the whole conversation around chaos and control and having chaos footy and the small forward debate, Nath. But do you reckon Willie Rioli is the key to Port Premiership? Now, I understand this is a bit of a loaded question based off how well he went on the weekend, but take Butters and Rosie and Horn-Francis out the question. If you're looking at that forward line and what you've spoken about with the small forwards, do you reckon that really Willie Rioli is the key to a Port success?
Well, I think he'd be an important player for Port Adelaide's likelihood of winning, given the fact he probably is their best small forward. And he's already been there before on grand final day with West Coast. So he knows what it's like to be on grand final day. And once again, you just have to look to last year. Bobby Hill, Norm Smith medal with 4 goals on grand final day was basically the difference between Collingwood's 16th premiership and Chris Fagan finally winning his first grand final. So, yes, I think Rioli is going to be probably Port Adelaide's most important forward for the next 2 weeks if they get through this week against Sydney. Because, as I just spoke about, the game becomes more chaotic at these in preliminary final and grand final weeks, and it's generally your small forwards who are the ones that score the goals. So Rioli probably needs to have at least one of the two. It's a big game if Port Adelaide, for Port Adelaide to win the premiership. He's just probably got to be serviceable in one, so probably a goal or two, and then if he can break off the chain like he did against Hawthorn, but probably didn't capitalise as much. But if he has a Bobby Hill type game, and Port Adelaide are probably going to be hard to, it's probably going to be hard for Port Adelaide to not win if he's having a game like he did on Friday night. So
yeah,
I think he's probably going to be their most important forward for the next 2 weeks, to put it that way.
No, I do agree. I think he provides a lot of X factor, and he's a very hard matchup to play against. He can play tall and can play small, and that's invaluable in a small forward. But moving on to everyone's favourite segment of the week, Nathan has got a fair few gripes. It'd be very interesting to hear his take on the whole Ginnivan Hinkley situation that kind of blew up social media come Friday night, and he's got definitely an umpire. Not sure if those listening or watching how they can recognise who the umpire is, but I think Nathan's got his number on speed dial and is not very happy with his performance. So take it away and don't blow a fuse before this weekend.
Right, who am I starting off with?
Oh, take your pick. Start with the umpire and we'll finish off with a bang with Ginnivan.
Right, Mr. For those of you who do not recognise that umpire is Mr. Curtis the Boy. Now, people tell me that umpires cannot alter the momentum of football games. I have friends that are umpires who have told me that their decisions cannot alter the momentum of a game. If you are going to sit there and tell me that that is correct, you might just as well as go and join Laura Kane and Andrew Dillon and say that the umpiring has never been better than what it is now, because this umpire basically Port Adelaide had all of the momentum. This umpire pays 3 free kicks. Now, you can argue if they were there, or if the Hawthorn players exaggerated contact, which I think on at least 2 of them, they probably did exaggerate contact. The Marbior Chol and the Dylan Moore ones definitely looked like that their heads leant into the ground and the umpire got sucked into it and paid a free kick. Now, you go and have a look. After that moment, it basically took Port Adelaide 2 whole quarters again to get momentum back. And they were probably lucky in the end that they kicked those 3 goals in the at the start of the last quarter to break that game open, because I think if Hawthorn actually won this game, I think rather than talking about Ginnivan and Ken Hinkley, I think this would be the biggest talking point right now. And this umpire, Mr. DuBois, was also the same umpire who basically stood over the top of the Marbior Chol out of bounds, which I did see that. And I know he doesn't have any, I guess, ability to make a decision in that circumstance. But surely, if you're going to be a field umpire, surely you can overrule the boundary umpire if you are certain that that ball was out of bounds. And I think Blind Freddy could have seen that that ball was out of bounds. So, to Curtis, I don't think you're going to be there on preliminary final week. I don't think you're going to be there on grand final week. So it's probably time for you to book your holiday, and perhaps reflect on some of the decisions that you made. But I guess it comes into a much bigger issue too, that I've been long an advocate of that. If the AFL are going to crack down on this concussion stuff and outlaw, these sling tackles and dangerous tackles, that's perfectly fine. But I want to see the AFL come out and say next year that if you're exaggerating contact by leaning your head into the ground to try and win the umpire a free kick, I do not see how that is any different than over-exaggerating, say, a trip or something like that, where you get fined for staging. Because I think if you're going to go to the point of putting your head into the ground to try and win a free kick and put yourself at risk of concussion for the sake of trying to suck the umpire into giving you free kicks, then I think that you need to be protected from yourself. And whether or not it's a fine, whether or not it's a suspension, I think the AFL need to come out and crack down on this, because I think having a look at that Hawthorn game, I think there's going to be more teams who go out and try and do this over the summer. And the unfortunate reality is that the tackler is going to be the one who gets suspended, even if the player whose head slings into the ground, even if the player who gets tackled over exaggerates the contact by putting their head into the ground to try and win the free kick. So that is a really, really big grey area. And I will just briefly touch on this Jack Ginnivan and Ken Hinkley stuff. This has been the biggest over-exaggeration of the year. First of all, I think Jack Ginnivan is a very silly boy for putting that comment on Instagram. I think if he did it privately to Grundy and that was the end of it, well, I don't think any of that happens again. But I think he set his team up to fail by doing that, because I think it gave Port Adelaide a reason perhaps to galvanise, and it perhaps united them with a common cause. And whilst Ginnivan himself probably was somewhat influential with his couple of goals, the simple fact is that Hinkley was right in that they are on a plane back home without a prelim final. And all year, Hawthorn have been the side who have been doing this all year. And as soon as one side comes back at them and basically uses their own words against them, they cry poor. So you can't have it both ways, where you're going to openly perhaps flaunt the tolerance of what's acceptable, and then as soon as it comes back to you, you all of a sudden run away crying poor. And I think if the AFL Coaches Association have any guts and courage, I think they will appeal Ken Hinkley's decision to be fined $20,000, because I can guarantee you now that come the fixturing for next year, the AFL will take what happened in this game into account. And I would not be surprised if Port Adelaide and Hawthorn are given an early season game to build upon what happened in this at the end of this game. So I don't think you can have it both ways, where you can come out and say that it's that an AFL coach has, again, perhaps overstepped the line, but him and his club got given due reason to fine the coach for conduct unbecoming, and then use that conduct to then promote this matchup the following year. That just does not sit comfortably with me. And I honestly hope that the AFL Coaches Association come out and say, we're going to appeal this. And even if they can't get the fine completely written off, have it reduced to perhaps a quarter of what it is, rather than the $20,000, because I just think that that's a coach who's passionate, who defends his club to the hilt. He's probably been under the most pressure, and perhaps I just think that this is a massive, massive overreaction for something that that was a bit of fun. And I think Sam Mitchell would probably be perhaps embarrassed as well with his own comments about what happened in this, by saying that he wasn't going to go out and seek Hinkley, and to use the press conference to basically cry poor that someone went after someone else. So, I think perhaps it's a good thing the Hawthorn are out. Then people can stop telling me about how good Hockball is and whatnot, because from what I saw of Hockball on Friday night, the very limited amount of it, it was basically sling your head in the ground, play for free kicks, try and suck the umpire in, and if the umpire gets sucked in, we score goals. If we don't, then we're quite poor. Basically, that's the way that I viewed that. So, they're my nags for the week.
Yeah, nice one. I think this is probably the third, and the reason I bring this up is I did mention this on social media, and this caused a bit of a debate as well. This is probably the first time in a long time that I'm going to be disagreeing with Nathan on something here with regards specifically to Hinkley's behaviour on Friday night. I do agree the $20,000 fine's a bit excessive and whatever, but I think as a coach, and I'm going to basically double down on what I mentioned on social media on Friday night, I think it is unacceptable for a coach to behave like the way he did, as much as he's passionate, as much as he loves his players, to get sucked in by a comment made by Ginnivan, who in his own right is a fourth-year player. So don't get me wrong. It's not like it's a 15-year-old child. It's a game of under-18 footy, and completely different conversation there. But the fact that a coach has been sucked in and reacted in the way that he has showed it's gotten under Ken's skin, and he's reacted in a way that I would say is a little bit inappropriate as a coach. Because as a coach, I think the first thing you've got to make sure you do is keep your temperament and let the players do the talking. If the players did reacted in the way that Ken did, all for it. Yeah, no problems there. Having a bit of a mouth off between, say, a Rosie and a Butters and Sicily at the end of the game, saying, look, you're not coming to Sydney, F off pretty much, right? But the fact of the matter is, Hinkley's a coach. There's a boundary line. I think there's a fine boundary that the coaches can't step over when it comes to this white line fever thing, where players are allowed to do that sort of stuff. And what stays on the field is on the field. But Ken basically dragged something that was external onto the field and acted pretty poorly, I think. I think as a coach, you'd be disappointed in his actions. And I can understand where Mitchell's frustrations kind of blew in over to the press conference. I can completely understand where he's coming from. I know that it might have sounded petty a little bit on the interview and the press conference, but you could tell he was very pissed off at what Ken was doing. And I think he was just supporting his boys in the fact that, at the end of the day, like Ginnivan, you can't control what he does half the time. As much as idiotic as he seems sometimes, the stuff he sometimes pulls. But I think you kind of can't just say that Hinkley is showing personality and all that sort of stuff that we ask for players to show passion and personality and not be muted by the media. I think this is a complete over the top by Hinkley. He's got sucked in by Ginnivan and he's reacted poorly in the fact that as a coach, the first person that should be humble in defeat is a senior coach. Let the players do all that shenanigans after the game and whatever, how long that goes for. But the coach should be just get on with the job, move on to next week. I think he's a very lucky man to be even in the job in the first place. So to gloat like that and react in that way showed that it 100% got in under his skin. And they're very lucky they won that game, because if they lost that game, if Sicily kicked that goal, I don't think Ken would have a job, and I think Ginnivan would have the last cry there. So yeah, little bit different, differing in opinions, but
I will say he probably could have. I will say he probably could have done it a little bit better, Ken. He probably could have perhaps waited until after Luke Bruce had gone off the ground, because I think that sort of overshadowed.
Oh yeah, 100% agree.
Bruce and being a great player for Hawthorn. But I'm just sort of more the case of, if you're going to talk the talk, you've got to be able to walk the walk. And if you're going to put yourself at risk by being an idiot and posting that stuff on social media, well, I just think that you've got to be able to deal with the repercussions regardless of what they are. That's just my, I guess, take on it.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. I think there is a time and place for those conversations to have place, and I just don't think it was on centre stage when Bruce was, having that guard of honour. But moving on to the prelim finals, that's all said and done. It'll be very interesting, the reception the Sydney Swans fans give Cam when he rocks up on Friday night in a hostile Sydney crowd. Last time these two met, it was a bit awkward for the Swans. They got absolutely pumped by over 100 points in a game that the Swans would like to forget, and it could be a bit of a redemption arc for the Swannies. They pretty much have the golden ticket to the grand final. They've won, dominated to snatch a win out of the Giants' hands in the first qualifying final, and then obviously that meant they had a rest and they're back home at the SCG. Do you think there is a world that the Port Adelaide Power come to destroy the chances of the Swans making the grand final, or do you think it is all too easy for the Swans to make the granny?
Now, I'm actually going to ask you a question here, Thomas.
Yeah.
When do you think the last time Sydney beat Port Adelaide actually was?
I haven't checked the stats, but I'm assuming based off what you've just asked me in that question, the way you phrased it, probably hasn't been for a while. So I reckon the last time they beat them would have probably been. Is it a long time?
I'm just going to tell you, round 20, 2016.
Yeah, thought so.
Was the last time
when the Swans were up and about.
Was the last time that the Sydney Swans beat Port Adelaide, and in any ground, doesn't matter if it was SCG, Adelaide Oval, the last time the Sydney Swans beat Port Adelaide was round 20, 2016. So if you're going to talk about a bogey side, this is probably the worst possible matchup that the Sydney Swans could have got. In terms of a side who they have not beaten for a long, long time. But if you're going to be premiers, you have to be able to beat any side at any place at any time. And again, I just look back last year to Collingwood. Craig McRae did not beat Collingwood. Craig McRae did not beat Brisbane as a Collingwood coach. In fact, I think Brisbane going into that grand final had won the last 5 or 6 games against Collingwood, and everyone was like, they just thought they would continue. And Collingwood turned the tables and won that game, and then they won both the matchups this year. And quite often, when it comes to these types of games, these big finals, we do see that sometimes that they flip the results around compared to what they've done in the past. Perhaps it's the pressure, the occasion that can spur sides on. So in saying all of that, Sydney deserve to be heavy favourites for this game. All the stats say that the Swans probably should be winning this game comfortably as well. But that is just something to keep in the back of your mind. The fact that Port Adelaide have won the last 8 encounters against them, and they did meet just 2 months ago, and they won by 112 points. I would be putting my entire collection on the line that it's not going to happen again, that big a margin. But I can say that Port Adelaide will go into this game with a massive amount of confidence, given the fact that they've won the last 8 encounters against the Swans. And if there's any sign of, scarring from that last game, you're going to know in the first 10 minutes. Basically, I will be tipping the Sydney Swans in this game, but just keep that in the back of your mind that Port Adelaide have won the last 8 encounters against the two sides.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a bogey side for the Swannies, and I think if anything, Port probably know that stat, or Ken's probably made well aware of that stat by now. And I think it's just the case that Port stuck up really well against the Swans. I think Swans don't really have a designated key forward, and the Port do really well when that's the case. And the likes of Alir can then, rather than playing more one-on-one lockdown, he ends up being a rebound defender, and they're very effective moving out the ball. I think they stuck up very well offensively speaking, and they probably stretched the Swannies in the height category. So, I think we spoke off air, Nath, about potentially a bit of a reuniting factor with the Port playing Brisbane perhaps in a rematch of 20 years ago. So that'd be definitely something. And I think the Power will know that stat coming into the finals. But moving on to the key players of the Swannies, these have been obviously updated week to week, as I said beforehand, based off the performances that we've seen across the final series. I think Isaac Heaney and Chad Warner, the duo there is super dangerous, and I think they are a real key crux to unlocking a grand final berth for the Swannies. Heaney basically won it off his own boot against the Giants, and Warner, I think, pretty sure he had 13 disposals in the last quarter. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure it was something like that to get them over the line. So when he's on fire, and he's a player that, as a midfielder, he can score goals for fun off stoppage, which is super important. And I think Tom Papley is the last on that list that I think will become extra important come the game against Port Adelaide. Just a hype man, just electric energy that he brings to that forward 50. He's elite. He's rated elite in kicks inside the forward 50. Not inside the 450, playing as a forward. So yeah, he's actually a very good field kick from what I've seen, and he's very penetrating, moving that ball inside 50. But if he can get on a hand of a couple goals, I think that'll lift the Swannies about 10-20% more than what is required of them, and can really drag them over the line. But what are your thoughts on any other key players that I think come Friday night are going to be crucial to getting the win for the Swannies?
Yeah, I think all of these three probably are the reasons that the Swans are going to win this game if they do. I think Heaney, Warner, and Papley all have to have big games if they're going to win. I think for Heaney, he has to hit the scoreboard. He has to. I think the big players come to the fore in these types of games, and generally it is preliminary finals where the big names do stand up. Again, I know I'm referencing Collingwood a lot, but Jordan De Goey single-handedly won Collingwood the preliminary final last year against the Giants, because outside of him, everyone else was basically fairly even, and it was just that one big player who basically took the game away. So for Sydney, I think for Sydney, it's probably going to be Warner who's going to be that player, given the sort of similarity that he does have to De Goey, in that he's probably a bigger body, perhaps more contested style player.
Yeah.
But I think Heaney has to have a big game as well on the outside. And as for Papley, while we're spoken about the small forwards, he's probably their best small forward. So he has to get on the scoreboard if they are any chance of winning this game. I think the other one who perhaps might be the next one on there, I think Grundy has to dominate the midfield matchup with. He's probably going to get a favourable matchup with probably Jordan Sweet. So you'd think with that, Sydney probably will win the hit-out battle. But again, hit-outs don't always correspond to clearance numbers. But I think Grundy's going to have a say, and I think the other one who's probably going to have a say is Nick Blakey off that half-back line. I think if he can get himself into the game with his run and carry, I think that will go a long way to helping Sydney break down this Port Adelaide defence, which I have pointed out has been actually very good the last sort of 6 to 8 weeks, other than that Geelong game. It has been very good the last 6 to 8 weeks. So I think Sydney will have watched that Geelong game and perhaps will try and take some lessons from that on what Geelong did to basically nullify Port Adelaide. But at the end of the day, Sydney are not Geelong, and they'll have their own way of doing it. But I think they would be crazy to not look at least some of the stuff that Geelong did, and perhaps consider that when they're going into their planning.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think if they can replicate, the quarter that they performed against the Giants, and then times that by 4, they're going to be a really threatening force to the SCG, which I think is the main caveat, or the reason why Port are going to come in as severe underdogs. But moving on to the Port Adelaide Power, as you said, they've been winning games for fun against the Swannies for the last 10 years or so. Warren Francis, I think he's probably, I think his report is overcoming that it was just cramp, not a hamstring awareness or injury. So he's good to go. He presents a seriously enticing opportunity to step up at the big stage when it counts the most. I think you look at the likes of James Jordan will probably go to a Butters. Rowbottoms, most likely, wouldn't be surprised he goes to a Horn Francis if he can break any sort of tag and then push hard forward and create a mismatch in that Swans forward line will go a long way for the Port. Winning really early, as we said, was probably the most impressive player in the second week of finals, bar some, individual brilliance from the Lions. He's someone, if he gets off the chain, and he's going to come up against a really tough opponent in Rampy. I think that's going to be a really tough battle between him and Rampy if they do go head-to-head. That'll be a hard one for her. If he can break that and kick a few goals, that'll go a long way. And I think Jordan Sweet presents a really interesting opportunity or interesting option as a key player to nullify Brodie Grundy. He did an excellent job against Lloyd Meek, averages 35.6 hitouts a game. Against Grundy is a different proposition altogether, considering that Grundy's a bit more around the ground compared to Meek, who's a bit of a stay-at-home ruckman. What are your thoughts on these three? Is there anyone else that I've left out that you think are going to be of real value come Friday night?
Yeah, well, I'll put it bluntly. So just before I touch this, I have just read on my phone that David Koch has confirmed that Ken Hinkley will be Port Adelaide's coach for 2025.
Yeah.
So I think we can probably put that to the bed now. Apparently, the contract's already been done and signed. From what David Koch was saying. So I will just put that out there. But yes, so I spoke in week 1 about Jason Horne-Francis. I think he's the reason that Port Adelaide can win the premiership. He needs to be the player like he was in that first half on Friday night when he was outside of Rioli, probably Port Adelaide's best player up until that point. He needs to be that every week for Port Adelaide to go all the way. Because even though I know people say Butters and Butters and Rosie, perhaps the more polished players, but Horne-Francis probably is their Jordan De Goey, in that he's got grunt, he's a bigger body, he can go forward, he can kick goals. So he needs to have a big game for Port Adelaide to be able to win this. We've already touched on Rioli. Yes, I think he's their most important forward. And as for Jordan Sweet, it is an interesting matchup, this, because I think he's going to have to do a similar job of nullifying Brodie Grundy for them to be any chance. He has got a good record of nullifying sort of ruckman. I don't think there's been many who've gotten off the chain against him the last sort of 2 or so months. So that probably holds them in good stead that if they can at least break even, I think they will back in their own midfielders to probably beat the Swans midfielders one-on-one, which will probably give them territory going forward. So, but I think probably perhaps even Sweet's perhaps their most important player for this matchup, just purely for that reason. But again, they can't win it without Jason Horne-Francis being the player like he was in the first half. So if there's any doubt about him, that's going to be a massive blow for Port Adelaide's chances.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. I think, you're not wrong there. And I think if those key players don't step up, Sydney's running all over the top of them very, very quickly, and it'll be all over the Port basically by halftime if the Swans can replicate a quarter like they did against the Giants. But moving on to the second prelim final, which presents itself to be a really tasty main course to the final series, I think, in the fact that the Lions look down and out for the count against the Giants, and they've just resurrected themselves and probably present a big threat against the Cats. As much as we look at the score at the bottom there, where the Cats defeat the Lions 63-37, the last time they met, that was when the Lions had a terrible start to the season. They've completely turned that round now, led by Dunkley and Neil back to career, basically to Brownlow form for Neil in that sense. What are your thoughts on this game? Is it simple as the Lions have left a little bit too little in the tank left, or do you reckon there is a chance of a serious, or not a serious upset, but an upset to some degree here, being the away team, having played an extra game and make their way to the big dance for the second time in a row?
Well, I guess you haven't mentioned the biggest factor yet, and that is the fact that it's on the MCG.
Yeah.
The MCG record has been well spoken about as being horrendous. In saying that, though, I think this is their best chance of beating Geelong in a prelim final. I think they played in 2 prelim finals previously. One of them was at the Gabba. They lost by about 40 points, I think, and then they played in 2022, which was that one game I spoke about when it was a 12-goal margin, which was the only non-chaotic prelim final over the last sort of 3 or 4 years of data that I've got. So, again, as I said earlier, the way Chris Scott sets up his Geelong team does not allow Brisbane to do what they want to do at all. And the fact that he's had 2 weeks to prepare for this means that even though I think Geelong statistically probably are the weakest side left out of the 4 of them, that I think purely because of the fact that he's had 2 weeks to prepare, and they've probably got a good matchup for Brisbane. That again, I will be tipping Geelong in this game. I'm surprised that Brisbane got through last week even. So well done to them. But as I said, if they're not on Brisbane early on, they are going to get found out because they're on their bogey ground, which is the MCG. They've only beaten Melbourne there in the last sort of 5 or 10 years. But basically, they've only beaten Melbourne there. As I said, this does pose as an interesting game, just purely because I think numbers-wise, Geelong probably are the weakest one of the top 4 sides, probably the weakest side statistically who are left. But I still think they're good enough to beat Brisbane on the MCG. So I will be tipping Geelong for this one.
I think, I don't know. It'd be definitely interesting contest for sure. I personally have jumped on the Brisbane Lions bandwagon. I'm definitely going to be cheering for the Lions come Saturday twilight. I'm not a huge fan of the Cats as a club in general. I think that the Lions can do some serious damage here. I think they stuck up quite well. They just I think the one big nervous kind of thing coming out of the Geelong camp is GWS are a fast side to start with, and then the Lions took them, absolutely tore them a new one in that last quarter there. And the Cats are not fastest at the best of times. Granted, they probably altered their game plan a little bit to accommodate the players they have now and the game style they want to go with, your Holmes off half back and whatnot. But I think the Lions can exploit them big time. They've got the key tools to do that. It's on the MCG. The weather will be perfect for footy, I think. And I'm hoping for a close contest, but I'm going to say the Lions by under 10 points, I reckon. But that's just my 2 cents worth. But moving on, before I know that we've almost hit the hour mark, it's been a bit of a long one, but hopefully stick out with us to the end. Geelong key players, I think Stewart's back. Tommy Atkins also presents as a super important player to try and nullify probably Lockie Neal, not as much as a clamp down, shutdown, total shutdown role, but a tag around stoppages. And Jeremy Cameron, he was important in the first one. He's going to be important again with potentially them sticking fat with Shannon Neal and not picking Tom Hawkins. I think Cameron's the one that can really exploit Brisbane Lions defence. If there is a problem with the Brisbane Lions, it is their defence. I think they're a little bit leaky at the best of times. Harris Andrew probably goes to a Shannon Neal or whoever is that full forward for the Cats that I think he can run with Cameron. Cameron probably cops even a Starcevic maybe plays that role plays a little bit taller. I don't know anyone else in that Brisbane lineup that can run with him all day. Brisbane fans, if you know who you think's the best matchup, let me know or let us know in the comments. But what are your thoughts on the Geelong lineup or the potential lineup and any key players that you think are going to stand out in this game that may not be listed in here?
Yeah, well, I think you've nailed it on the head there with Jeremy Cameron. He was the one that I was going to put up on there. I think he is basically, as I said, as I touched on earlier, I think he is the one exception to that key forward rule, because he doesn't really play like a key forward, even though he is, nearly 200 centimeters. He can win ground ball. He can run all day. He's got a big engine. So he's Geelong's most important player for probably the next 2 weeks, just because of what he provides them. But I will say as well that they still need their small forwards to be hitting the scoreboard. So Stengel needs to, Holmes needs to, Close needs to, Myers needs to. They all still need to hit the scoreboard. But Cameron's gonna probably get I'm struggling as well to think of a matchup for him off the top of my head, because I don't think they would want Harris Andrews running up the ground all day, looking after Cameron. I don't think Payne probably has the fitness to do it, and then all the other defenders that they have probably giving away height, which is what makes Cameron such a difficult matchup, and that's why, at least I think he's still the best player in the AFL. Because he can turn a game just like that. And, he scores the freakish goals like he did with that, the snap kick against Port Adelaide, which I don't know if any other player in the AFL could have done that, outside of perhaps, you really, top 1% of players like a Nick Dacos, or someone like that. So, I think he's the key. Stewart, I think he just comes back in, goes to his normal role that he's been playing. I don't know if Brisbane send a tag to him. They don't normally tag, so I think that's that. And Atkins, I think Dangerfield's still the one in the midfield for mine. That's going to have a big say on this game as well. But Atkins, no doubt, will probably have some kind of role on Neil, whether or not it's just a caller that gets described. But yeah, I think this game's just made for Geelong to keep on going on their merry way, despite, as I said, statistically, they're probably the weakest side left in it. But I think they've probably got the one side who they wanted to play in the prelim final. And I think the stars are aligning for Geelong to get back to another grand final, which would probably be one of the best coaching performances in a long time, given that Geelong's list probably, at least on paper, isn't as good as a lot of the other sides that are left in there, but they're just chugging along, doing everything that they have to do. So, I think they're probably the key players for mine for Geelong.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I think, you're spot on the money with the coaching masterclass by Chris Scott. He played Kenny Hinkley to a T, coached that to perfection. I wouldn't be surprised if he studied up on them. He had his scouts out there when the Lions played on the weekend. I think he's had that 2-week period to really study whoever side he's got. He's going to coach him to a T. I wouldn't be surprised if the Cats topple over them. I just think that could be a bit of a fairy tale story for the Lions potentially coming up, because I think if they win this game, they're almost a favourite leading into it, because we know how shaky at the best of times Port and the Swans can be. But I think the toughest challenge out of those three sides are the Cats. They play at home. They're going to play in front of a home ground, as much as that's not at Alphabet Stadium. It's down at the G. So, it'll be a game I think that will be etched in the memory books, that's for sure. But moving on to the final key players for the Lions, I think Zorko and Neil, we've touched upon them already in our top 4 takeaways. I think if you take away their game, you take away they run, the Lions lose. That's how important I think they are to their side. You look at Zorko, 502.9 metres gained as an average, season average. He just finds pockets of space to Gabba or wherever he plays, where he can just pivot through and really cause some damage. Neil, as I've said time and time again, I think when he gets the ball, problems happen for the opposition. He pretty much scores out of it. And Oscar McKinnon is an interesting one that didn't set the AFL scene on light with elite ruckman and whatnot, but I think he provides a really good opportunity to get the ball down for the Lions midfielders to get the ball first. I think he's going to come up against a pretty weak ruck line with regards to a Stanley or whoever they play down there. Could be a Blitzarves coming in to do a bit of a tandem ruck duo with whoever they go with as their primary ruck. But I think McInerney, with how big he is, the size he's got, he has the capability of pushing two-way. He's a good two-way runner as well for his size. So I think he can really exploit the Cats' midfield by getting first use of the ball straight down into Alex Dunkley, Neil, and off they go. Is there anyone I'm missing out of those three players before we wrap it up for tonight?
No, I think those, at least Neil and Zorko, probably are the two most important players for Brisbane because they get them going in the midfield and off the half-back line. And yeah, Big O is an interesting one because, yeah, you would say he's probably going to get a Stanley or a Blitzarves. Yeah. So there's probably going to be at least advantage for Brisbane there. But as I said, it's just the fact that it's Geelong and Chris Scott is probably is a master coach, and I think he will know this going into that game that perhaps they are weak in the ruck division. But basically, if Brisbane are not winning clearances, they are no chance of beating this Geelong team. So if Brisbane are going to win, I think it's going to probably be what they do at clearance and not necessarily from turnover, even though they are a really good turnover side, Brisbane. I just think that there is an opportunity there for Brisbane to get Geelong at clearance, which sort of goes against what I was saying. That about the scores from turnover being, the more perhaps premiership, more of a premiership indicator. But there are outliers in every stats area that you look at. I know 2018, the prelim, for example, there was a massive outlier in that Richmond v Collingwood. Richmond won the scores from turnover, but still lost the game by 40 points. So there are outliers. I think this has a chance of being one of them because I cannot see Geelong losing to Brisbane in a turnover style game. So this is the only way that I think I can see Brisbane at least winning this is through what they do at stoppage or clearance. And I think Neil and Big O are going to have a massive say on that. And then, again, Brisbane's forward line so dynamic. Bailey, Cameron, Danaher, they all need to play well for Brisbane to be any chance as well. So that's sort of where I'm coming from, where I think this game's set up for Geelong to progress into a grand final because they probably get the side who they want the most. And I can't see Brisbane beating Geelong in one of those high transition games, just purely because of the way that Chris Scott sets it up. I think the only way Brisbane are going to win this game is through what they do at stoppage.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. I think you look at the Lions and you look at, 3 quarters of the game and you say there's no chance in hell they beat the Giants, and they do beat the Giants, and all of a sudden it's a different conversation against the Cats. But I think if the Cats played like they did against Port and absolutely dismantled them, the Lions are a side that you can absolutely dismantle as well if you play your cards right, because the Lions at the best of times, they're not the same as last year where they've dominated games. They've just looked shaky all year round. There's been patches where they've been amazing, hence why they probably snatched against the Giants. But I think if the Cats are going to really rubber stamp their credentials into a grand final and feel confident going to a grand final, this is a game they got to take by the scruff of the neck and really dominate. Having said that, I think it's a prelim. Anything can happen. And I think the Lions are a very sneaky chance of going back-to-back in grand finals.
Prelims can be funny events as well.
Yeah, definitely a team I'll be rooting for, and I think it'll be very strong support.
Strange things happen on preliminary final night. Not from a statistical viewpoint, but just the build up into them.
Yeah.
The stats profile doesn't change. It's just that
Yeah.
things occur in prelim finals that perhaps are strange, misleading. Like a Mason Cox 5-minute performance that just
Yeah.
rips the heart out of Richmond supporters, who still hate Mason Cox to this day for that moment. That sort of stuff just happens on preliminary final night. And that's what I mean by just strange things can happen on preliminary final night. So
Yeah.
don't be surprised if something really out of the blue happens this week, that perhaps is completely unexpected, because it does happen. And if it generally happens, it's this week of the season where it happens.
Nah, 100% agree. There'd be definitely some strange results come this weekend if they played their cards right. But that's all we got time for today. Hopefully you enjoyed a bit of a longer edition of our final series. Thank you for the support that we've had on this series as well. It's been well received, I think, as well as we move into the big dance next week. We'll have to confirm some things off air as well, just moving forward. But we're hoping to potentially release a Brownlow special as well, considering the night of nights for AFL's Glitz and Glamour is on the Monday night, leading into a massive preview of whoever the two sides are lucky enough to make the grand final. And postseason, there'll be lots of good content to look forward to. There'll be the wash up with the teams that didn't make the final series that we haven't covered off yet, those who made the final series and didn't win the grand final. And then we lead all into a juicy trade period where there'll be lots of rumours and trades being made across the table, under the table, how you want to see trades being done these days. But that's all we got time for. Hope you have a lovely rest of your week and enjoy the prelim finals.